On January 3, 1944, Major Gregory Boyington was flying his Corsair over the St. George Channel when Japanese Zeros swarmed him. His plane took hits and burst into flames. He bailed out, but as he floated down, the enemy fighters strafed him in the water. How he survived that he never knew. His life raft was shot away, and he was forced to strip off his clothes just to stay afloat. A Japanese destroyer pulled him from the water. Boyington was taken to the prison camp at Rabaul. He expected to be treated as a prisoner of war. Instead, the Japanese labeled him a special captive. They knew he was a major, and they believed he held valuable military secrets. His past as a flying tiger, fighting without a uniform, was a secret that could get him killed. How would a man with such a past survive the beatings and interrogations that lay ahead? That was the question Boyington faced as he entered the squalid compound. He had only his wits and a stubborn will to see him through. Upon arrival, Boyington was beaten and questioned. He stuck to his cover story. He was an operations officer who had merely gone along for the ride. The interpreter, Suyako, relayed the questions, but Boyington gave nothing real away. The Japanese grew frustrated. In the camp, he was called number 10 man. The Japanese grading system ranked prisoners from 1, the best, down to 10, which was no good. His injuries and emaciated state placed him at the bottom. Guards forced him to sit up during the day, and if he closed his eyes, they struck him in the face. At night, they locked handcuffs on him, but Boyington had a trick. He bent a nail with his teeth and used it to pick the lock. It gave him a small measure of control. One morning, he failed to wake in time, and the guard discovered the unlocked cuffs. Boyington convinced the guard that the cuffs must have been defective. The guard beat him anyway, but the trick saved him from worse punishment. After 10 days, the Japanese finally allowed someone to treat Boyington's wounds. Dr. Hugh Wheatley, captured at Munda, used saltwater compresses made from rags to draw out the infection. There was almost no medicine available. Boyington also suffered from malaria, but he had to endure without quinine. Interrogations continued daily. One day, Suyako said that the commanding general would have all prisoners shot if Boyington did not reveal his commanding officer's name. Boyington pretended to remember and gave a false name, Colonel Living Lard. He even sketched a location on an aerial photo, sending the Japanese on a wild goose chase. It was a small victory. In the filth and pain of Rabaul, Boyington's defiance took root. He learned to pick handcuffs, to lie convincingly, and to endure the beatings, and starvation did not break him. He was still number 10 man, but he knew he could last. The war was far from over. In the middle of February, Suyako came to the cell and told 6 prisoners they were leaving by air for Tokyo. They were loaded into a twin-engine Betty bomber, blindfolds tied tight. But no sooner had they taken off when American fighters swarmed around them, forcing the plane down on a nearby strip. The next morning, they tried again, and this time the bomber stayed aloft long enough to reach the island of Truk. They landed at Truk just as a massive American carrier raid exploded across the field. Boyington could hear the rattle of 50 caliber machine guns and the roar of Navy F-6F fighters strafing the Japanese planes parked along the runway. Their own Betty burst into flames behind them. Suyako grabbed the prisoners and threw them into a shallow pit as bombs began to fall. A 2,000-pound bomb struck only 15 feet from where they lay, but somehow none of them were hit. After the raid, the 6 men were herded into a tiny cell built for one person. The heat was stifling, and the air was thick with the stench of sweat and filth. Each man was rationed to 3 small cups of water per day, and their lips soon swelled and cracked. Donald Boyle, a fellow Corsair pilot, developed terrible diarrhea from the poor food, and the cramped space made every moment unbearable. 2 more American prisoners were brought in after the raid, one of them delirious from his wounds. The guards beat him savagely and then carried him away. The other man was placed in the cell next door, and the prisoners whispered to him through a crack in the wall. His name was George Bullard, a Navy pilot who had served as Butch O'Hare's executive officer, and he told Boyington that everyone back home thought he was dead. After 16 days, Suyako returned with news that transport had arrived from the north. They were flown out in a twin-engine passenger plane, stopping first at what they believed was the island of Saipan, where a Japanese warrant officer treated them with unexpected kindness. The next night they spent at the foot of Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima, shivering in a lean-to as the cold wind swept over the volcanic ash. Their final flight took them to an airport near Yokohama, and from there they rode a streetcar into the hills outside the city. The landscape was green and peaceful, a strange contrast to the bomb-pocked islands they had left behind. Suyako pointed to a wooden stockade and said, "This is going to be your new home." The camp was called Ofuna, a secret naval interrogation center where captives were held off the books, and where Boyington would spend more than a year of his life. Ofuna was a special camp, hidden in the hills outside Yokohama. Boyington learned fast that he was not a prisoner of war, but a special captive held off the books. His ration was three-quarters of what a regular prisoner got. The guards could not speak English, and the prisoners were forbidden to speak without permission. Beatings came for the smallest infractions. A guard named Swivel Neck caught Boyington whispering to another man in the courtyard. Without a word, Swivel Neck grabbed him, dragged him into the open, and ordered him to stand at attention. Then he swung a club that looked like a baseball bat. Boyington gritted his teeth and prayed he would not fall. The guard tired, but another took over with a smaller bat. By the time they finished, his backside was a mass of bruises. Swivelneck drew a circle in the dirt about 2 feet across and told him to stand there until dark. Boyington stood swaying, his blood rushing to the crushed flesh. When Swivelneck screamed, "Do you understand?" Boyington muttered a reply in Japanese and then added in English, "Now go FK yourself, little man." He did not fall. Among the prisoners he came to know was Jim Condant, a Navy pilot shot down over Marcus Island, whose friendship would prove lasting. That was life at Ofuna. Day after day, the interrogators came, the quiz kids, the prisoners called them. They asked the same questions about bases, commanders, ship movements. Boyington stuck to his old lies, but one day a Princeton-educated Japanese captain laid a typewritten sheet on the desk. It was a radio broadcast from the United States. It said Major Gregory Boyington had been awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. The captain named Boyington's mother and told him she had christened a carrier in his honor. Boyington knew his cover was blown, but the captain did not beat him. Instead, he offered a cigarette and said the Japanese appreciated a hero, even from another country. From then on, Boyington's captors knew exactly who he was, but his treatment did not get worse. What did get worse was the hunger. The barley and watery soup left him hollow. He dreamed of ice boxes and remembered every meal his mother ever cooked. One day, he got hold of a soap bone as big as his fist. It took him 2 days to devour every bit of it, bone and all that. Was how desperate a man could get. After 9 months in Ofuna, Boyington's weight had dropped to 110 pounds. He could hear his own joints crack during the compulsory calisthenics. Then the Japanese gave him a job in the kitchen working from 4:30 in the morning until 9 at night. For that, he earned an extra bowl of barley and a bowl of soup a day. But the heavy work of hauling water and rice sacks demanded more fuel. So he stole food. He stole from the guard stores, lard, fish, anything he could swallow fast. An old Japanese civilian woman worked in the kitchen. Boyington called her Obasan, which meant auntie. She was about 60, wore rags, and spoke no English. When the guards were not looking, she would nudge him toward the lard barrel. He would scoop a handful of the stinking fat and gulp it down like honey. Once, when the guards baked fish for a special visitor, Obasan hid a hot fish in her apron and passed it to him. He stuffed it into his mouth and choked back, tears from the heat. She watched the door while he stole, and he watched the windows. Between them, they kept him alive. With Obasan's help, Boyington gained weight. By the time he had worked in the kitchen for several months, he was back up to 190 pounds. He got to know the guards' routines and learned to speak some Japanese, though he pretended not to. The guards thought they were intimidating him. He was quietly outsmarting them. In the slow afternoons, when the kitchen was empty, Obasan would brew tea and steal a little sugar meant for the officers. She would light her tiny pipe, and Boyington would smoke his own improvised cigarettes, snipes he had picked up from the guardhouse floor. They would sit by the warm ovens, sipping sweet tea, and she would talk about how much she longed for the war to end. She told him about her daughters and her grandchild. She never said it directly, but he knew she was a Christian. Her kindness day after day was a lifeline. He never forgot her. New Year's Eve arrived and the Japanese were preparing a celebration. The head guard Gocha asked Boynton to tend the fires in the kitchen until midnight. He was happy to oblige. He had his eye on the food. Around 10:30, Gocha brought in a case of sake and asked for hot water to warm it. Boynton sat by the stove minding his own business when a guard came in and offered him a drink. It had been almost a year since his last drink, a year of forced sobriety in prison camp. He hesitated for only a second. Then he grabbed a soup bowl instead of a cup and held it out. The guard poured and Boynton drank. After that, every guard who came for sake found Boynton waiting with his bowl. He drank bowl after bowl. By the time the party died down, he was drunk. Somehow, he found his way back to his cell and wrapped himself in his blankets. The next morning, he woke up with a headache, but alive. Nobody had reported him. He had broken his year of sobriety, and the old craving was back. The months at Ofuna stretched into 13. Boynton survived the beatings, the hunger, the interrogations. He learned that the Japanese guards were not all monsters. Some, like the college-educated guards who refused to strike prisoners, were decent men, but the war raged on. In early 1945, the B-29s began appearing overhead, and the prisoners could hear the distant thunder of bombs. Boynton knew the end was coming, but he did not know if he would live to see it. In the kitchen, he continued to steal food, and Obbison continued to help. Then, one day in April, 18 prisoners were told they were being transferred out of Ofuna to a new camp. Boynton packed his few belongings and walked out the gate. He did not look back. In April 1945, Boynton and 17 other prisoners were moved from Ofuna to a new camp called Omuri. They were lined up in front of an administration building and forced to stand the entire day in the cold. A Japanese colonel appeared toward evening and announced through an interpreter that they would remain as special prisoners. Any attempt to escape meant death. Boynton looked around at the hills and thought, a white man would show up like a boil on the end of his nose. They were put to work clearing debris from bombed-out city streets and digging tunnels 200 feet into the hillsides. The B-29s came over daily, and the prisoners called them the music. They were not allowed into shelters. They stood in the open and watched the silver bombers drop their eggs, and the ground shook. Boynton also met the camp interpreter, Kono, a gentle man who risked his own safety to do small kindnesses for the prisoners, and who patiently explained the meaning of the Japanese prayers that sounded like a mournful sing-song. On August 15, 1945, the war ended. Boynton was lying ill with yellow jaundice on his straw mat when an elderly guard told him the news in a whisper. That evening, the Japanese guards got drunk. One non-commissioned officer staggered to the prisoner's doorway swinging a samurai sword and shouted that he would kill every American. He beat on the door until it splintered. Boynton had a hammer and nails that the guard on duty had given them. He nailed the door shut from the inside and stood with the hammer in his hand, ready to swing at the first head that came through. The drunk wore himself out and collapsed. No one was killed that night. The war was over, but the last danger had come from the despair of the defeated. 6 days after the war ended, American forces reached Omuri camp. Boynton, still weak from yellow jaundice, walked to the beach where the landing craft had docked. Sailors planted 3 flags in the sand: the Dutch flag, the British flag, and the Stars and Stripes. Without a hat to remove, he saluted the American flag bareheaded, the sharpest salute he ever gave. Harold Stassen, the governor of Minnesota, approached and extended his hand. "Pappy, we didn't know you were alive until a plane spotted your name painted on a building this morning." Boynton felt numb, unable to cry or laugh. He was taken aboard the hospital ship Benevolence, given a disinfectant shower, and issued new clothes. He ate 5 orders of ham and eggs that first meal. Then came the flights: Guam, Kwajalein, Pearl Harbor. At Pearl Harbor, Major General Nutsmore threw his arms around Boynton. "I blamed myself for your getting shot down," Moore said. He arranged for Boynton's promotion to lieutenant colonel and extended his stay in Hawaii. When Boynton landed in San Francisco, 20 of his old Black Sheep squadron were waiting. They tossed him on their shoulders and sang the squadron song. That evening, they gave him a gold watch engraved "To Gramps" from his Black Sheep. He was flown to Washington to receive the Medal of Honor from President Truman and the Navy Cross from the Commandant. The Medal of Honor citation was brief, based on an old newspaper account. The Navy Cross citation was even shorter. Boyington felt the honors were hollow. He was sent on a 3-month bond tour across the country, giving speeches and shaking hands. The schedule was brutal. In Portland, he drank heavily before a talk and insulted the audience. That night, his uncle took him to a nightclub to calm down. But the drinking had returned. Boyington retired from the Marine Corps on disability. He could not find steady work. He took a job refereeing professional wrestling, a hobby that let him blow off steam but fed his old habits. One night at Southgate, a fan blocked his exit after a match. The man grabbed him and a mob surged forward. Frances, Boyington's wife, pulled a man off his back. Boyington knocked another man cold. Wrestlers rushed to clear the crowd. They escaped to the dressing room without serious injury. Over the next 10 years, his drinking worsened. He lost jobs. He was arrested repeatedly. Reporters splashed his name across front pages for all the wrong reasons. In 1955, he finally admitted he was powerless. 2 men from Alcoholics Anonymous visited his home. They had been sober for years. Boyington stopped drinking that year and never touched a drink again. He began to understand that true liberation came from surrendering pride and seeking help. His final battle was within himself. He looked back not with regret, but with a quiet chuckle at the things he would never have done sober. His story stands as a reminder that heroes are human. The same man who once picked handcuffs with a bent nail and survived a Japanese prison camp also faced a war inside his own skin. In the years after liberation, he worked quietly to ensure the people who had carried him through were not forgotten. He wrote a letter to the War Crimes Commission to protect Suyako, who had saved his life on Truk. He asked his black sheep pilots to deliver money and candy to Obesan. Though he never learned if they reached her, he never forgot the gentle interpreter Kono, whose quiet courage saved lives and left an indelible mark on his memory. And Jim Condant, the fellow captive he had known at Ofuna, defended his character years later at a military conference, proving that the bonds of captivity outlasted any slander. George Bullard, another pilot he met in that same prison cell, survived the war. He won his inner war, not by fighting, but by letting go, and by honoring the connections that had held him together. That is the real victory. If you have any personal stories or family memories from this era, we invite you to share them in the comments. We read everyone. Please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like to support our future historical documentaries. Thank you for listening.